Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the Armored Warhost and talking about perhaps one of the more controversial detachments of Grotsmas. So, as we've been kind of diving into all of the detachments that exist for Grotsmas, there's only a couple of them that stand out to be not only worse than the current detachments, but actually just in the game probably the worst detachments that you could actually pick. And that goes for all the detachments of every single faction, right? And a lot of people have been saying, at least in the Eldar community, that this detachment's probably one of the worst. Now, while I don't technically agree that it's one of the worst in the game, I definitely think it's one of the worst of Grotsmas. I think that the reasons why it's bad are not going to be the reasons that a lot of other people think it's bad, but we will dive into that later on in the video. So, here's the gist of it, right? A lot of people think this detachment sucks. I personally think that it's not a great detachment, but there are some highlights to it that are kind of fun to use. I'm going to be honest. I've, kind of on my own play tested a couple of the things, ran through a couple of the different stratagems and, synergies and tactics that you can use with this detachment, and I don't think it's completely without fun. However, is it as powerful as Battle Host? Absolutely not. It doesn't come close to the power of Battle Host for a number of reasons, which we will also talk about in this video. But it can do some interesting things, and I think as a concept, it's going to be good, especially when compared with some of the new rules that we're likely to get with our codex. So without further ado, let us go ahead and dive right in. So we're going to be talking about the detachment rule enhancements and stratagems of this Armored Warhost. We're going to be talking about the pros and cons of the detachment itself, the best units in the detachment and why they're the best. We're going to be talking about if you can run Armored Warhost as the Ynnari, the playstyle of the list and its win condition, an example of the Armored Warhost that I actually made, so a list that I created that is close to the optimal build for this style of list, and some of the cool tricks the detachment can pull off shown on Tabletop Simulator. So as for the detachment rule, we have skilled crews. Now this is a very good detachment rule for the first couple of turns of the game. It allows you to basically have your whole army have the assault ability. Now it's only vehicles, so it's not as good as some other detachments out there, like Renegade Raiders, for example, which gives mostly everything assault. But, this is a vehicle-oriented detachment, so yeah, vehicles are going to obviously be the beneficiary here. And then Eldari vehicles that can fly also get reroll to advance rolls. And again, this is a detachment roll that is very good during turns 1 and turns 2. It falls off later in the game when you have already used your movement to stage and things like that, but it is still situationally useful from then on. It's mostly going to be used for the first couple of turns to get into a better position or to get lines of sight onto units that you may not normally have line of sight to. All right, as for the stratagems, we have Anti-Grab Repulsion. So, like I said in the reveal when I was talking about this, my opinion of this hasn't really changed. It's not that great of a stratagem. It's very situational. It can be good when combined with the Night Spinner, but my opinion on the Night Spinner is it's a little too expensive right now, and we're going to have to kind of wait and see what the Codex does with it to determine whether it's going to be overall good or not. And it's essentially just -2 to charge rolls. That's all it does. It can only target an Eldari vehicle that can fly also, so it's a little bit, situational and limited. But we have seen a lot of other detachments get something like this, so I guess GW is really pushing this kind of stratagem. I don't think it's that good. I don't think it's that useful in the game, but, there's going to be a few duds in every detachment. We also have Soul Sight. This is the damage dealing one. Now, this is kind of a feels bad, I think, in my opinion, because it's just basically the Battle Host detachment rule, but you get a reroll a damage roll. So, not the best. I will say, though, this is really good on things like the Falcon. The number of times that I have been, using a Falcon and I use a Fate dice to boost one of my, boost my Bright Lance up to a 6, and then the Pulse Lasers just do no damage and then I end up having to spend, CP on a command reroll to get that damage boosted up. The fact that we can just, reroll to hit, reroll to wound, and 1 damage wherever we want to, and then decide what we want to spend our fate dice on later is nice. Again, It's maybe not better than just battle host on everything, but it's certainly going to help some units throughout your army. You're probably going to be wanting to use this each and every turn with your falcons or with your, you know, war walkers or something like that. Something that is going to really benefit from, one hit, one wound, and one damage roll. Next, we have Cloud Strike. Now, Cloud Strike is really interesting. I think the best way to use this, it's 6-inch deep strike for your vehicles, essentially, that can fly. So, unfortunately, no 6-inch deep strike with D cannons, guys. Sorry. Or war walkers. Not that you would want to, but it does kind of help you with objectives. So, hard to get objectives like behind enemy lines, or, things like, I don't know, containment if you can't really get outside of a deployment zone easily, or your opponent's screening you in certain areas. It could be useful. Let's just put it that way, right? It can definitely be useful. It can drop a Viper in wherever you need it, and you can score secondaries with it, which is really good. As for the transport part of this rule, if the unit's a transport and you can disembark units just outside of 6 inches, I don't think that's really that good because Fire Dragons still aren't going to get their Melta bonus. Dire Avengers don't need the extra range to get closer to enemies. They just don't. And yeah, that's basically it, what I have. I don't think transports are going to be easy to use this ability with because you're going to have to dump out the unit. So if you're using a Wave Serpent and you're dumping out 10 models, all those 10 models and your Wave Serpent have to be outside of 6 inches of enemy units. That's very unlikely before turn 3. If we had a stratagem in this detachment that allowed for uppy downy, that allowed you to pull a unit at the end of your opponent's turn from the battlefield, put it back into reserve or deep strike, I think Cloud Strike would be insanely good on those types of units. But unfortunately, it's not. So your late game, kind of potential with this stratagem is absolutely zero. You can't use it beyond turn 3, which is, again, one of the problems I have with this detachment, unfortunately. I think they definitely should have given this detachment uppy downy. That would have made this much more powerful. But it is, again, still strong on things like Vipers and, occasionally Falcons if you really need to just hide them in reserve until you can bring them in on the battlefield. Next, we have Vectored Engines. This is basically a fallback and shoot for Aeldari vehicles that can fly. Again, unfortunately, it's not every Aeldari vehicle, which is a shame. It would be great to be able to use this on something like a support weapon, which, if you're using Battle Host, you can do. You can't do it here. So, it is going to be useful, but it's situational, and it's more limited than what the other detachments in the game got. So, a lot of the other detachments get to fall back, shoot, and charge, and we only get to fall back and shoot, which sounds kind of lame. So, unfortunately, yeah, it's not as good as the rest of them, but it is still useful, and you'll probably still use it within your games. Now, this is actually one of the detachment defining stratagem. Swift deployment allows you to advance with an Eldari vehicle and disembark in the same turn. You can't charge, but you can otherwise act normally. This is fantastic. Not only does it kind of help you score some secondaries at times, but it can really absolutely give you an alpha strike on an enemy unit in the backfield. Using this with the combination of Eldari speed, you can bring a Wave Serpent that scouts 7 with Corsairs, moves 20 inches with an advance roll with, obviously Fate Die support, and disembarks 3 inches. You can bring a Wave Serpent from one side of the battlefield to your enemy's deployment zone in a single turn. Move blocking and all that stuff. This is extremely strong. I love this stratagem. And it's one of the reasons why I think this detachment gets a leg up over Battle Host in the first couple of turns of the game. Turns 1 and turns 2, Armored Warhost is, in my opinion, the superior Mekdar list because of this stratagem alone, because it gives you a lot of options as to what you want to hit turn 1. Now, is it good for turns 3, 4, and 5? Not really, because after those turns, you're pretty much already going to be engaged, and this stratagem kind of falls off, just like Cloud Strike. And that's what gets me thinking that this detachment's really more of an Alpha Strike type detachment. You want to basically win the game in the first 3 turns. If you can't gain control of the game in the first 3 turns, you're not going to win, and you're probably going to lose pretty bad. It's a very difficult list to pilot after the first 3 turns. But yeah, I love this this stratagem, obviously, and you can also run it later, in turns 2 with Fire Dragons out of a Falcon. If your opponent responds to your Wave Serpent and Corsairs getting out, you could just automatically respond with a Falcon and 5 Fire Dragons, just shooting them in the face with advance and shoot. So there are some really good things about this detachment, specifically this stratagem. I think any other stratagem, it's yeah, there's some stinkers in there, but this one is really good. And lastly, we have Layered Wards. So Layered Wards is going to be a stratagem that basically is not going to really come into play that much against most things, right? But the good news is it does protect you against stuff like lucky railgun shots, I mean, have you ever faced a Tau player and they're like, oh, firing my railgun, and it's like 1 out of 6 chance to get a dev wound, and they roll that 6 and they're like, oh, you know? Okay, well, now I at least get a 5-up feel no pain against it instead of just automatically dying to the ability, right? Or pretty much automatically dying to the ability or to the weapon. So, it does give you a little bit of survivability against that kind of stuff. Against most weapons of the game, though, it's not going to do anything, and it's very situational. Okay, so yeah, that's it for the stratagems. We have Guileful Strategist for the enhancements, Aeldari model only, so it's not limited to Psychers, allows you to redeploy 3 Aeldari vehicle units from your army, and that's really good. And when you're doing so, you can move them into strategic reserves, which is also really cool. So this is really good on things like Vipers, which you can use to bait enemy units out into the open, right? You can trick your opponent into thinking you're going to be heavy on one side of the battlefield, and then you could just pull them right back into strategic reserve and cloud strike in. I think this enhancement is actually a requirement for this detachment because of the cloud strike stratagem. And just in general, the way this army wants to play, it wants to win in the first 3 turns of the game. And how do you do that? Well, you misdirect your opponent in deployment, and you pull your opponent's units where you want them to go instead of where your opponent wants them to go. And of course, you have the ability to just redeploy your Vipers in another area of the battlefield. You don't have to put them in strategic reserve if you don't want to, but you're probably going to move a couple of units at least to strategic reserve. I like to put 2 Vipers in strat reserve, and I like to use one of my other, moves to move a Wave Serpent into a different position on the battlefield where it's going to be safe once it moves its 7-inch scout. And again, when I say that, I'm of course referring to Corsair Void Reavers being in the Wave Serpent, because that is how you have to run this detachment. Absolutely. Our next enhancement is Spirit Stone of Raylith. This is another good one. Gives Lone Op to an Aeldari Psyker. Really good with the Farseer Skyrunner, and I think it's basically just for the Farseer Skyrunner. This list really does need buffs to its shooting. So because you don't have Battle Host rerolls, you need Guide. You probably would do good with Doom. Eldrad, I think, is a decent choice in this list. I don't have him in my own list, but, I was considering getting rid of a Warwalker for him, to be honest with you. I'm also, really a big fan of Vipers that, Vipers and Shroud Runners can also improve the shooting profiles of your weapons. So having something that can guide is really good. You can also heal a vehicle D3 loss wounds. I don't think that's that good, but, it does kind of, make your, well, at least one tank more durable. At least one tank in the game is going to take wounds on 1 turn, and it doesn't fully die. So being able to heal it a little bit, make it a little bit harder for your opponent to kill, is good. And I think, honestly, even if it didn't do that, just having Lone Op on something is pretty decent. The next one is the Harmonization Matrix. 30 points, gives you a CP on a 3+. This is worthless. Even if you can be in a transport, it's just kind of worthless. You already have the Autarch that does that, so you really do not need this enhancement. If the Codex comes out and Autarchs mysteriously lose their CP generation, which they may or may not, to be honest with you, I think if they do lose it, people may stop running Autarchs altogether. But if they don't lose it, and I don't think they will, I think the worst thing that can happen is maybe they'll say, oh, you gain a CP on a 3+, or you gain a CP on a 2+ with an Autarch. But I don't think they're going to get rid of it completely. If that's the case, I can see the case for the Harmonization Matrix being put on a model just so that you don't have to buy an Autarch. It's just a cheaper Autarch, but currently it's worthless and shouldn't be taken. And last, we have Guiding Presence. Aeldari Psyker model only. Select a Aeldari vehicle within 9 inches and you get +1 to hit. I think this is okay. I thought it was pretty good when I first read it, but when I'm actually building the list, I often find I don't really have 25 extra points to spend, and this is usually the first thing that gets cut. Just going to be real with you guys. I don't think it's mandatory to be in the army. I think a lot of people might say, oh, you can put it on a Cobra or a Falcon, and that'll be really good. Yeah, absolutely. +1 to hit on a, Cobra or Falcon is good, but we do have access to Guide, which is rerolls to hit on everything. Realistically, I know that this does still increase the power of something like a Cobra or Falcon, or excuse me, a Scorpion. But, I mean, I guess it could be okay on Falcons too. But I really don't think the Scorpion or Cobra are that good in this detachment. I think they're better off in Battle Host. And the reasons why is just simply put, you got a move, shoot, move ability via fire and fade in that detachment, and you don't have any reactive moves in this detachment. So, pretty much to me, it auto makes it so that the Battle Host is going to be better for those big targets. Okay, what are the pros and cons of the detachment? So the pros are it's really fast with long range threat. It doesn't matter if your Wave Serpents have 36 inches on their Bright Lances. It doesn't matter if you got 48 inches on your Pulse Laser or whatever it is, right? The fact of the matter remains, this game and the shooting lanes you're going to be shooting at, you need the correct angles, and this army allows you to get those angles on turn 1. It has very interesting utility in the form of Cloud Strike and Swift Deployment. I think those two stratagems are the standouts of the entire detachment. I think they're fantastic. It's a shame that the other stratagems aren't that good. What are the cons of the detachment, though? Because there are some serious cons that you need to consider. First of all, it really does need first turn to maximize the impact of its speed. If it goes second against a faster army, it's not going to do well. This is an army that really needs to go first. And that's one of those things about this game, right? Is that you can't guarantee that. It's a roll off. So it's essentially a 50-50 chance of you winning the roll off, approximately. Some people are luckier. But yeah, you can't base a whole strategy usually on going first unless you're just kind of having fun and you just want to, bring something that's different to the table. I'm not saying you can't lose, or I'm not saying you can't win, excuse me, if you go second, but the chances of losing are greater if you don't go first with this list. Another con is the damage is a lot more unreliable without built-in rerolls outside of the Soul Sight stratagem. We all knew this, right? So that's why you need to build up your support. That's why you need to build up things like Vipers, Shroud Runners, Farseer Skyrunner. You need those damage buffs in play. And sometimes Doom. I'm going to be real with you guys. If I play the list in, I'm actually going to probably play a game with this in a couple of days just to kind of test it out and see if it's as good as, or as bad, excuse me, as people say it is. No, because no one thinks it's really that good, except people who really don't play Eldar or people who are Giga Chads who can win probably with anything. But, you know, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Eldrad might be needed in this list. I think Eldrad is probably a good choice, but we'll wait and see on that until I get more info. Defensive buffs, of course, like I said, the defensive stratagems are situational at best. A minus to charge rolls or a protection, 5+ feel no pain against mortal wounds isn't that good, truly. There's only really 2 truly impactful enhancements. You only have the Spirit Stone of Raylith, which is Lone Op, and the Guileful Strategist. Everything else is kind of meh. There's no shoot move, or move shoot move, or even reactive move stratagems. So if your vehicle's out there, it's not going to be saved, right? You got to take the hits. And lastly, I think what is most on everybody's mind is, why wouldn't I just take Battle Host? And yeah, that's true. Battle Host offers a more well-rounded Mekhdar experience than Armored Warhost, simply because Battle Host doesn't need to get first turn to be effective, right? Because you have stratagems that focus around a more balanced list, you can operate on a different level playing Mekhdar with Battle Host. So you can run pretty much the same kind of stuff in a Mekhdar Battle Host list, which, by the way, I have run a very mechanized Eldar list in this edition with Battle Host, and it works very well. And you don't need to always go first with it, right? And this is coming from a player, by the way, my first competitive army was Mekdar, so I'm very attuned to what you need to do with a transport army to be able to win and dominate the battlefield. And I just think the Battle Host does offer that more well-rounded experience over this army. Okay, so what are the best units in the detachment and why? So Wave Serpents and Falcons obviously are the core to the list. They're going to be what you need to deny primary objectives and establish midboard presence, be able to move, block, and stuff like that. That's really important. This is how this list wins and dominates. Vipers make great support pieces, being able to strip cover and score cheeky secondaries with Cloud Strike. Again, you're going to need Vipers. Two are probably what you're going to want, but I like to go with the third one just because Vipers are, in my opinion, really needed, and they're cheap. They're cheap enough to, throw three of them on the list and not really feel the pain of that. Rangers are also needed to block scout moves and block enemy units. And of course, they can use their ability to move back into transports also. So if your opponent decides to, run up on them to shoot them, they can just hop back into the transport. It's really good against stuff like Tau that don't have a lot of close combat. So oftentimes what Tau will do is just shoot your vehicles to death and shoot your units to death. But, especially with things like, what are they called? Smart missile systems, right? Smart missile systems are so good against Rangers, but you can't use a smart missile system if I'm back in the transport, right? You got to shoot your unit first, and sometimes your smart missiles are not going to be able to target the Rangers afterward. Warwalkers are also really good. They get amazing angles on turn 1 with Scout 9 and Advance 16. I mean, you could literally hit something in the very back of your opponent's deployment zone on certain deployment types. So Warwalkers are very good. You're probably going to want one, if not two of these in your list. Personally, I think one is probably the sweet spot, but I actually have two in my list myself just for a little bit of redundancy because, of course, you don't have those Battle Host rerolls. The Night Spinner can prevent melee threats from being able to charge you, and you can stack this with Anti-Grab Repulsion. I think the main issue with the Night Spinner, it's just really expensive. For the same cost, you could have double Warwalker, you could have almost 3 Vipers. It's just a ridiculous points cost right now, and I really think they should change the Night Spinner altogether in the Codex. Fire Dragons are also a fantastic unit with Advance and Disembark with the Stratagem, but they also don't hit as hard as Battle Hosts, so you do need to be aware of that. Fuegan and Karandros are also good characters to bring along because of their damage, and of course Falcons can give them those rerolls to wound. And of course, having Fuegan in the list is always a good idea because of his revive ability. Farseer Skyrunners can give out rerolls to hit with Guide and boost Fate Dice efficiency. You really need a Farseer Skyrunner in your list because they can become Lone Op and they really boost your army's damage potential. Support weapons have a greater threat range with Assault, but because there's no auto 6-inch advance except through Fate Dice, it can make it kind of awkward, or you can overextend with the unit, and realistically, you can't move through walls with these guys because they're vehicles, so it's going to be really hard to sometimes actually get the full benefit of the full advance roll. Do I think support weapons are necessary in the Armored Warhost? I don't, because of that exact reason. I played around with them a little bit, deploying them and stuff like that to see if the extra threat range really did help. And in a lot of cases, it just didn't. It just didn't because you have to roll the advance roll. And, it's just not as strong as you guys would think, right? Because it gives them essentially a maximum of 6 extra inches of their threat. And it doesn't give them much else, essentially. So, that can be good in some cases, but sometimes you're not going to get it because, again, you have to move around walls and stuff, so that is a problem. And these guys typically want to be in your backfield, right on a wall or something like that, so they're not going to be able to move very far. The Cobra and the Scorpion can be given the +1 to hit via the enhancement, and they do have a good threat range with Assault, but they have no reactive move or move-shoot-move stratagem, and that makes them extremely vulnerable. So I think these models are good in this type of list, but I don't think they're better than Battle Host. Shroud Runners can buff the damage output of your units against a key target with lethal hits. And you're going to have to hit a lot harder with a lot of your units because you're going to have a harder time forcing saves. You don't get to reroll wounds, so lethal hits is a good answer to this. Guardian Defenders are also a good unit because they generate more Fate Dice and they screen your backfield, which is, again, super important with no Battle Host rerolls. You need more Fate Dice to be able to boost your save rolls, to be able to, advance as you want to, you know, you just need them. Trust me, it's going to be really good to have them in your list. Void Weavers are also pretty good in this detachment as they benefit greatly from having the Assault keyword on their ranged weapons. So again, Void Weavers, kind of expensive, but also really good. I mean, they don't get the Battle Host reroll, but, you can always throw Guide on them with a Farseer Skyrunner, and then they could just shoot forward with Assault, and they could hit a key target that's hiding with 2 Shuriken Cannons and, their Prism Cannon, which is pretty decent. They also have the Smoke keyword, which is nice. So that means they can survive a little longer, and they do have just a basic 4+ invulnerable save. And lastly, of course, like I said before, I think Eldrad would be a good introduction to this list as well, because he gives extra fate dice, and he also gives Doom. Now, the next question we have to ask ourselves is, can you run Armored Warhost as a Ynnari? Now, technically speaking, it looks like, based on the Warhammer app, and based on what we see in the rules, for you to be able to take Yvraine as your warlord and use the Ynnari rules, you have to use the Battle Host detachment. That's what it seems like, right? Because it's listed under the Battle Host detachment and not the army rules for the Aeldari. So there's a good case some players can make that you cannot take Ynnari if you want to run an Armored Warhost. However, now, this is actually what I believe. I don't think that that's actually the case. I think that the Ynnari rule specifically is meant to be separate from the actual detachment bonus, and it's just on the same page. So it's because they didn't have enough space to put it on 2 different pages, so they just put it under detachment rules, but it's actually its own thing. So that's what I think anyway. Again, if you want to go to a tournament or something like that with the Army Ynnari Armored Warhost, you're going to have to talk about that with your TO. And the reason for this is the Ynnari ability specifically states that within its own rules section, if your army faction is Eldari and your warlord is Yvraine, then you may include Drakkar units in your army up to, a certain amount of points with some restrictions. And it just says, if your army faction is Eldari and your warlord is Yvraine, boom, that's it. It doesn't mention detachment. It doesn't say you have to have a battle, you have to be in the Battle Host detachment or anything like that. So I do think that GW will hotfix this really quickly, or, just your TO should have some common sense and just say, you know what, I know that technically it looks like you shouldn't be able to do it, but the Ynnari rule specifically states if your army faction is Eldari. It doesn't say if your army detachment is Battle Host, right? So I think there's a good case that you can use Ynnari in an Armored Warhost detachment. But let me know in the comments what your position is on this. Keep it civil. I know people have different opinions on it, but, what do you guys think? And I personally think you should be able to do it. I don't see any reason why not. Now, is that more competitive? I mean, it's, you're losing a lot by losing Battle Host, right? But you are gaining a couple things. You're gaining an enhancement that can give you a CP, which is really powerful in Ynnari. You gain the ability to Cloud Strike things like Venoms and Raiders, which is kind of nice. And there's a couple of other cool things that you can do as well. So, there are some positives to it. I don't know if it's straight up better, though. I wouldn't say that it's straight up better to run it as a Ynnari list, but I don't know. There's a pretty good argument for it. I have to say, there's a pretty good argument for it. But you can't also take Phoenix Lords, and I do think, having Fuegan in the list is super strong. But anyway. Okay, so what is the playstyle of the list and its win condition? So the Armored Warhost mixes elements of Alpha Strike with primary denial and mid-board control. Ideally, what you want to happen is to go first. You want to be able to, with your scout units, eliminate a few key targets with your faster vehicles like Warwalkers, maybe even a Wave Serpent using swift deployment or something like that. And then use your move blockers and transports to flood objectives and prevent enemies from counterattacking you and regaining the objectives from you, which should give you a significant advantage in the early game. Support units are there to help you destroy things and, of course, help you be able to manage the battlefield a little bit better during these first turns, right? So Vipers, Shroud Runners, Farseer Skyrunner, Eldrad perhaps, giving you more damage, being able to score secondaries, and provide some utility for you. In theory, this is a really solid win condition, right? But in practice, because there are now so many detachments that can completely ignore move blockers, right? You have a lot of stuff that just flies or can move through terrain or other units through stratagems. And, in some cases, there's actually strats now that ignore modifiers to movement. So things like the Night Spinner and Anti-Grav Repulsion, they can be completely ignored, right? In a couple of the detachments. Now, that's exactly why I don't want to put a Night Spinner in this list, because you're banking on being able to do that to the enemy, but if the enemy can just go, oh, actually, I just ignore all movement modifiers, there's no point to doing it, right? So you've just wasted 210 points on something that's dead weight. And you're probably just going to have to use it to move block later in the game, because Night Spinners actually deal significantly less damage than Falcons against most targets. The 6-inch deep strike is also something that is very prevalent in almost every single detachment we've seen come out so far, right? There's tons of 6-inch deep strike. It's much more common, and your transports are not that durable. You don't have good overwatch in this army because you don't have that battle host reroll, and you're not bringing warp spiders technically. You're not bringing wind riders. You're not bringing all these units that are really good with overwatch, except maybe Dire Avengers with the Zerman, but that's really the only unit I could see fitting into this. And to be honest with you, I don't think it's the best choice anyway, because most of your stuff should just be in transports, dominating primary and stuff like that. So you're really going to be hard pressed to, deal with units that can just deep strike within 6, blow something up with Melta, blow something up with, plasma, whatever it is, and then get out. We have no defensive stratagems really in this detachment that are worth using in most cases. Okay, so here's the list. It's 2,000 points. Armored Warhost. We have characters, Autarch Wayleaper with the Dragon Fusion Gun, Howling Banshee Mask, and Starglaive, the classics, and we have the Guileful Strategist. We have a Farseer Skyrunner with Singing Spear and Spirit Stone of Raylith for 110 points. Again, we're going to need that lone op. We have Fuegan. Fuegan is just good. He's good in melee. He's good at ranged. He doesn't technically need a reroll because he hits on 2s usually. So he's pretty much good on his own. For battle line, we have 10 Guardian Defenders with the Bright Lance guarding our backfield. We have 3 units of 5 Corsairs with Power Swords and Blasters. Of course, if you want to, you can give them the, rifles or whatever. I just think the power weapons are the much better choice. We have 3 units of 5 Fire Dragons with Fire Pike Exarchs. We have 3 Vipers with Bright Lances. We have 3 Falcons with Bright Lances and Shuriken Cannons. And we have 2 Warwalkers and 3 units of 5 Rangers for, obviously move blocking, infiltrating, and, the whole move back into the transport trick, which is really neat. And I think it's a cool, fun way to kind of open up the game. And 3 Shroud Runners, of course, to end the list, giving us lethals on a key unit. And again, the reason I only have 3 of these guys, a lot of people might think, oh, well, why don't you have multiple units of these? Really, it's a matter of deployment space. There's not a lot of deployment space you're going to have with an army like this. And to be able to fit more Shroud Runners in a list, you're kind of going to have to put some in reserve, and I just don't think that's really worth it. The other thing is, you're really realistically only going to be winning the game from turns 1 to 3, and then if your opponent still has stuff left, they are going to start counterattacking you pretty hard. So having more units of Shroud Runners are really not, in my opinion, required. I think hit them super hard in the first couple of turns of the game, and you'll really only need 1 unit of Shroud Runners to help you out with that. Okay, so what are some potential changes that you can use to the list if you want to run it yourself and you really don't like the thing that's shown, or you want to kind of optimize it a little bit? Well, a unit of Fire Dragons and a Falcon can be subbed out for a Night Spinner if you want to go that route. I don't like it. I know a couple of people have advocated for it, a couple of competitive players, but I'm just going to say this right now. All it takes is a stratagem that says, oh, we ignore your movement debuffs, and that whole strategy is right out the window. So I personally don't like the Night Spinner. It's also 220 points. I mean, a unit of Fire Dragons and a Falcon can probably do and have a lot more impact than maybe I prevent something from charging, right? A Warwalker can also be subbed out for Karandras. And again, I know I say Kahandra sometimes, but that's just habit. I'll start saying Karandras because really I think that's how it's supposed to be said anyway. So Karandras, who can spend a CP for rapid ingress and going solo for some cheeky plays, or he can be put in a Falcon for wound rerolls and he's 90 points versus the 110 of a Warwalker. So you can technically throw something else in there if you wanted to, if you had the points for it. Fire Dragons can also be swapped for Striking Scorpions if you want a little bit more melee power, or Rangers and Fire Dragons for a troop with a Troop Master who can also go in the Falcon. And that's a very powerful combo as well. Adding a Solitaire might also be worth considering even without Phantasm. And like I said before, you can also swap out a Warwalker for Eldrad Uthran, who is extremely strong as well in this type of list that really does need to be able to wound its targets more effectively. Okay, guys, so this is the army and what it looks like on the table. Of course, this is tabletop sim, but essentially this is how large the army is going to be. As you notice, there is 6, Wave Serpent chases in this army. 3 Falcons, 3 Wave Serpents, and then there's 3 Vipers. We also have our Shroud Runners, our Rangers, our Corsairs, our Fire Dragons, our Warwalkers. Right, we have a bunch of different vehicles here. We do have a unit of Guardian Defenders again to generate Fate Dice and to kind of screen the backfield as needed. And for our characters, we have a Farseer Skyrunner with that Spirit Stone. We have Fuegan and an Autarch Wayleaper. So this is what the army looks like. Now, I've went ahead and deployed this army and basically kind of what you might expect on how to deploy this army. In Tabletop Simulator, we've just done a basic deployment here of Dawn of War, but of course, the different deployment zones will slightly differ. And in some cases, you may have to put more things in reserve than you wanted, or you may have to, use this L-shaped rune over here more, in case of, for example, you have something like, hammer and anvil, you would be deploying long ways, so you'd have to use this rune a lot more and use this rune on this side to hide your models. So, a couple differences here and there with deployment, but essentially it's going to boil down to the same thing, which is you're going to want to use scout moves to move Wave Serpents up. You're going to want to move the Falcons up into position turn 1. You're probably going to want to use a couple of units to get angles on their, really hard-hitting, tanks and stuff like that, so you can maybe just take them out of the battle right away. And you're going to mess with the deployment using the Gleamful Strategist. So the first thing is we are going to deploy our Rangers in a way where we cannot have our scout moves. Actually, should actually have these Rangers like this. Not second story. Come on, boy. God, Rangers can be the best boys sometimes, but sometimes not. So we'll have them like this, right? And this is more to just prevent us from getting out-scouted, if that makes sense. So let's move this Ranger a little bit over this way. So, for example, if your opponent chooses to use scout moves or infiltrators on you, you have an infiltrator line to prevent that. So your opponent can't get within 9 inches of these models. So they can only scout realistically up to like maybe here without first coming into contact. Yeah, like around there, right? They can scout up to there if they want to. That's only a couple inches though, and they really can't get much farther than that. So that means we can scout this Wave Serpent up here to be behind this terrain if we need to. We can scout this Wave Serpent up here because these Rangers are guarding that way. So we can scout this Wave Serpent over here behind this piece of terrain and give us a little breathing room, while units like our Viper over here that's super exposed, our Shroud Runners, which are also exposed, can also move to safety in these areas. So, Shroud Runners can move 9, so they can move over here. Wave Serpent can move up to here. You guys get the idea, right? We can basically move our army a little bit around before the battle starts so that we can get into safer positions so we don't get shot turn 1. Now, the other thing is, turn 1 comes around, right? And the first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be usually shooting up Warwalkers right up here. So we're going to move these Rangers out of the way. We're going to get them to either score an objective or something. Luckily, or hopefully I should say if we're lucky, we should get something like containment, so we could just move these Ranger units out to the side, score a quick containment on both units, and then, of course, that still screens. We could still use the Rangers to screen a little bit, and then we could shoot the Warwalkers up full bore. So they will get a scout move before the game starts. If you get second turn, the reason I deployed it like this is so that we could, use this Viper. We could shove this Viper back in reserve with our ability, Gleamful Strategist, and then we can move our Warwalkers right back behind this piece of terrain, right? So they're safe. Because you don't want to lose 2 Warwalkers on turn 1, no matter what kind of army you're running, even if you're running an Alpha Strike list. So we're going to move these guys up. Now, they move 9 inches with a scout move, right? So they move up to where the Rangers are at typically. and the Rangers are going to be so they'll be just behind the Rangers. Don't worry, we don't need the full amount of movement to actually get these guys where they need to go. The Rangers will then move afterward, and once they're moved up 8 inches in this case, they're going to go ahead and shoot forward 16 up to 16 inches, right? Now, usually they're just going to move, a little bit. They just need to get past really this piece of terrain. So, yeah, they really don't even need to move that far. In fact, they don't need to move more than, anything on an advance. And they can see basically everything back here. And they will be able to take shots at whatever they can, basically see. So they're going to be able to take out something pretty significant usually between the stratagem, right? And, the reroll hit, reroll wound, reroll damage. And just basically, if you need a command reroll or a fate dice, definitely throw it in there and make sure they can get what they need. All right, so there's the War Walkers. That's what they're doing. What is the rest of the army doing? So this is kind of how first turn should look. Let me go ahead and move my stuff up. And just imagine there's enemy models over here. I know I didn't put them on there, but, just imagine they're back here, right? So we move up our guys. We're going to move up, first of all, 8 inches. Actually, yeah, move up a little bit back. There we go. Move up here, just behind our Rangers. Our Rangers are going to move, so we're going to move our Rangers, like, right over here. Whoops. They're going to score that objective. And then we're going to go ahead and move the War Walkers forward from here. Now we're going to squeeze through this gap. So, again, we're going to just advance just because we can. We're at least probably going to get a 2 or something like that on advance. I can't see us not getting at least a 1. So yeah, we're going to move right here. Maybe we, kind of spread out a little bit and we shoot our targets that we want to shoot at. We kill it, and then that's it over there, right? The Rangers here, you could either do a couple things. You may have an objective to score in the middle. You may not, right? Area denial is a pretty common one, so you can get area denial if you have a unit of Rangers right there. You can also follow up with the well, let me show you something cool you can do first turn. So let's assume we get first turn, right? We're going to scout up 7. So we're going to move right to here. Boom, perfect. Now we're going to advance with a fate dice, and we have a Farseer right here, so we can actually turn this into a 6 right away. We're going to fate dice up 20 inches. So we're just going to go bloop. Whoops, too far. We're going to just fate dice right up there, 20 inches. Boom. We are in their deployment zone right now, right? And now, if they didn't put enough on that center objective, we can also use that stratagem. Remember I told you guys about that swift deployment to move 5 Corsair Void Reavers onto the objective. Boom, right? If they have a unit on it, we can shoot them. We can't assault, but we can shoot them. We have a blaster, we have pistols. It's not going to do that much damage, obviously, but it is going to give us the OC needed to capture the objective away from things like vehicles. So we can do that, and we can steal their home objective so they don't score anything until they destroy this stuff. And we're also move blocking anything from moving over here into the midboard. So we're doing a great job of just basically preventing our opponent from moving a lot of tanks and vehicles into the center of the battlefield. Now, we don't have to do this. We could play a little bit more conservative with the Wave Serpent. We could just move it behind here if we wanted to and just wait it out. But I think this is probably a better move because, again, we're trying to dominate the early game. We don't care if we lose this stuff. If it prevents our opponent from being able to just say, oh, I'm just going to move into the midboard and just fight you over the midboard, there's no way you can win. You have to be able to move block your opponent so they can't get there, right? We can always move these Rangers up to the objective, like I said. We have a couple of units over here, like this Wave Serpent can scout up here and move up here as well. Can advance onto the objective to prevent opponents from getting on it, right? We can move this Autarch into support. We can move this Viper if we need to later on. I don't think the Viper needs to move, though. I would actually keep it just right here. Maybe use these Guardians to spread out during the first turn and make sure you screen here so that your opponent can't just come in here with anything. right? And again, like I said, these Rangers can come over here for things like containment. Or, I mean, simply put, they could just stay there, score an objective on sabotage, right? Or this Viper can just move up slightly here, score some sabotage points. Although, truthfully, a couple of these Vipers are going to move back in reserve. Remember, I told you this one was going to move back in reserve. Most likely, it's going to be in reserve, so we don't really have to worry about it staying there. And then this one's going to go in reserve, definitely, because we use this to bait out something over here, right? Our Shroud Runners, right? We're probably right around here. Yeah, what's 9 inches? Yeah, 9 inches there, right? So we can use them to now move 14 inches and advance. We don't have to advance. We could just move them up 14. That's usually fine. But if we do need to advance to get to safety and there's nothing here that can threaten us, we definitely want to go ahead and just do something like this, right? We can score objective later on in the game with an advance roll. We can move our Wave Serpent. It's going to scout up here first, typically speaking, and then we can move it probably closer to this edge. Just, well, I personally would just leave it because we can threaten anything that comes into this area on turn 2 with swift deployment if we need to. So we don't need to worry about that. This Falcon wants to move up here so that it can, and this is probably the one with Fuegan in it, so it can threaten the midboard or anything that comes out. And then we could just kind of move other stuff around, right? We can move this, we said 7 inches, so yeah, 5, and then we're going to pivot for 7. So that's going to be our, our movement there, our scout move, and then we could just move 14 inches up here and advance, and we can definitely get there, right? That's 13 inches. So yeah, with an advance roll, we're definitely going to be able to pivot and do all that. Get that up there. Again, we're spreading out with these guys. The Falcon comes over here. At least this is how I would do my first turn, by the way. This is, not how everybody might do it, but we can move that right there. And again, this can do the same thing. We can speed this up with swift deployment, and we could just murder something here. We could do the same thing here without the stratagem and just murder something. And then we're probably going to want one of these just to kind of hang back a little bit. Probably something like right here. Wants to get into position, maybe for a third turn. And then, of course, remember, these are back in reserve. So we could put those over there. They're in reserve, coming through via Cloud Strike and stuff like that. And our first year Skyrunner, he's a lone op. I would just put him right here, right? It's just so he's kind of in range of all this stuff, right? He can pass along his fate dice to this to keep it alive if he needs to. We have a sacrificial unit over here blocking this area, and we could even string these guys out a little bit. I didn't even mention this, but if your opponent already has enough OC to grab the objective, we could just say, okay, we're just going to, spread out a little bit here. We're still going to put some OC on the objective, but we're also not going to be stupid about it. We're going to make sure that all of our models are blocking, right, as much as we can. Something like that. I know these aren't perfect, but, something like this. And then we can, of course, still shoot the Wave Serpent, still shoot these guys, which is kind of cool. So now our opponent's in a bad position. They have to deal with these Warwalkers. They have to deal with these Rangers. They have to deal with this Wave Serpent. They have to deal with these Corsairs. It's possible for them to do that, don't get me wrong, but if they put a lot of their army into this little L-shaped ruin, they're in trouble because they're not going to be able to get out of it that easily on turn 1. We have just basically caged them in. And then if we want to do something even cheekier, let's say they have some infantry that could just move right through walls, right? This Ranger unit right here can advance forward, right? We can advance forward. Let's say we just get a 3R in advance roll, right? We go up 10 inches. You know what I'm saying? And we just have a couple of units back here. Of course, that's not quite 2 inches, but you guys get the idea, right? We're still covering this objective with something. Your opponent does still have to deal with this unit of Rangers, but we've screened a little bit. And, possibly we could do this too, right? It's probably the better move. Go like this. Anyway, it's not going to be perfect, but you guys get the idea there. And, we could even move the Autarch up as well if we wanted to. Not saying it's a great idea all the time to do this, but, if your opponent doesn't have anything to deal with it right away, you can definitely do that and get away with it. So yeah, so this is turn 1, right? Now turn 2, maybe they eliminate this stuff, but then their units are like clustered right here on their home objective, and guess what you got? You got a Falcon right here that can come up, jump out fire dragons, shoot. You got a Falcon right here that can come up, dump out fire dragons, shoot. You got Fuegan in there. You got an Autarch here. You got Shroud Runners now placed over here that can also move up to support. They can move around here, mark something with lethal hits. You have a couple of Vipers that can come into reserve, one Cloud Striking. You probably only need one of them to Cloud Strike somewhere, right? Your Farseer Skyrunner can move up to a safer position, maybe behind here. Wave Serpent can come up and block this again. Or take this objective, right? The possibilities are endless. This Falcon can now come over here. You don't care about this area anymore, really, to screen because it's not even needed. There's no objectives over here except for this one. You only need to screen with these Rangers. So it's cool. You can keep maybe something like a Farseer Skyrunner around your vehicles and you're good. As for your Guardians, yeah, they're just going to want to cover this center objective right here. They're Gucci, and that's about it. And you can even bring the other, if you feel like you don't need 2 Cloud Strikes, bring the other Viper right here just to screen. Like if you're going against something with a ton of Deep Strike and you're worried that your Guardians are going to get shredded on the home objective, okay, just bring a Viper right here and make sure that, your opponent has to land somewhere over here to be able to, be successfully Deep Striking. They're not going to be able to see the Guardians. Yeah, they can probably kill the Viper, but again, Viper 75 points, it's expendable, and it's doing its job. So yeah, absolutely, that's how you want to play the first couple turns of the game. If you can successfully pull something like this off right away, you can definitely score a lot of points on your opponent against primary. I mean, look at this. We basically have a situation where all 3 primary objectives are going to be a little bit harder for our opponent to get because of all the stuff we're kind of throwing at them turn 1. And then on top of that, they're going to have a hard time, they're maybe they'll regain one objective, but then they're going to have a hard time keeping it, right? So you can definitely just, go forward again as well. And I'd even say if you get first turn, just throw the Wave Serpent up here, right? I mean, what is your opponent realistically going to do to kill this? You're behind a wall here. There's not much they can do here. So yeah, throw the Wave Serpent on there. Throw the Rangers up at something. Maybe use them to throw up here behind this ruin. Make it harder for your opponent to move through this area. And then, if they destroy the Wave Serpent, the Corsairs come out, you capture the objective still, right? That's always a good play. So there's a lot of cool things you can do, like I said, with this army, turns 1, 2, and maybe even 3. I think, again, where this army kind of falls off is more in the later game. When your stuff starts dying, you have less tools to move block. And then when you have less tools to move block, you don't necessarily have the damage to kill the rest of your opponent's army. So if you do whiff and you don't do much during the first couple turns of the game, that's probably all she wrote, right? But that's why you load up your army with damage buffs and with Bright Lances. We have a ton of Bright Lances in this list. 3 twin-linked Bright Lances, which does matter in a detachment that can't reroll wounds. We have 3 Bright Lances and 3 Pulse Lasers from the Falcon, so that's up to 6 Bright Lances. We have 3 more Bright Lances with Vipers. We have a Bright Lance on a Guardian squad, right? We have 3 Blasters, which are in our Corsair units, which are not great against vehicles, but they do something. We have a Fusion Gun. We have Fire Dragons. We have Fuegan. We have a ton of anti-armor in this list. Like, this list does hit hard, right? It doesn't hit as hard as the Battle Host comparison, but it still hits pretty hard, and the advantage to this list is it's more mobile and it's a little bit more flexible than something like Battle Host is when it comes to the first couple turns of the game. So yeah, that's it. I just wanted to show you a few tactics, and like I said, if your opponent goes first, you can always move these units into Wave Serpents. You could even do something a little cheeky, right? Move this Wave Serpent a little bit back, and then maybe instead of moving over here with the Rangers, you just kind of move up to here with the Rangers, right? You move a little bit closer, right, when you advance, and then when your opponent, I mean, you're not going to screen as much here, but when your opponent moves forward, maybe they move right behind this ruin, or maybe they try to go over here, you could just say, oh, you're trying to get movement on me by assaulting me and moving onto the objective? Oh, I'm just going to hop in this Wave Serpent. I'm going to roll a 3+ or a 2+. Let's see, what is it? From this model, you're going to need at least a 3, right? You're going to need at least a 3 to hop in there. But you roll that 3, you get within 3 of the Wave Serpent, you hop in with their ability, and you're in the Wave Serpent now, so you don't get charged. And then if they end up killing the Wave Serpent, you could dump the Rangers out on the other side of this wall and block movement from this angle. I don't know. It's just there's a lot of cool things you can do with this army. You just have to have your positioning right, and you have to have certain things really kind of like down pat as far as your, you know, positioning, your deployment, what you're shooting at, and stuff like that. But if you can practice that a little bit and get it all down, there's actually some really cool things you can do. And I like this army. Do I think it's as good as Battle Host? Again, I've said this 1,000 times probably already in this video. No, it's not. So obviously, if anybody in the comments is like, "Oh, this is worse than Battle Host," of course it's worse than Battle Host, but it's still interesting and good in its own way. It's just out of the Grotmus detachments, it's one of the stinkers of the group, but that doesn't mean it's total trash in all cases, right? There are some things you can do with it that are interesting. As long as you build it correctly. And I think for me personally, that's one of the big failing points about this detachment. You have to build it very specifically. You have to build it with multiples of every unit. And I personally don't like playing that way a whole lot. I like using a variety of units. I think this army is really only going to work with a select couple of units, a certain group of units, and there's not much variety to it. I don't think you're going to get much variety with this detachment, which is unfortunate. And that's where I'm at with this detachment. That's why I don't really like it that much. It's not because it's worse than Battle Host. It's because it's, list building wise, it's kind of boring. The fun thing about it is actually moving around with the wave serpents and stuff like that. However, and this is a big however, I am a lover of Mekdar. I've always liked Mekdar. Again, they were my first competitive army. I've played them throughout every edition in some way, shape, or form, even if it sucked. So, it's something I'm a big fan of. If you're not a fan of super mechanized lists, this isn't going to be for you. It's not for you. You're probably better off using Battle Host. It is a little bit of a disappointment that it's not, right? That's not that, generally good with other units. But, I do think, and by the way, we never asked for a mechanized, like, who was asking for a mechanized detachment? I don't think anybody was, right? I mean, I don't know. Let me know in the comments. Was anybody, like, really hoping for a mechanized detachment? Like, yes, I want to spam wave serpents and falcons. That's what I want out of my Christmas detachment. Probably not. I wasn't even hoping for it, and I love Mekdar, and I wasn't hoping for it. So, that should show you that should show you how much, how many Eldar players actually wanted to see this. And then when they found out it was worse than Battle Host, they were like, oh, screw this, right? So, anyway, I think obviously the detachment was going to come in one form or another. At least it's out of the way now, and we don't have to worry about this in the Codex. When the Codex comes out, we're just going to be focusing on the big five, right? All the big craft world stuff, and then, Ynnari and Harlequins as well. So we'll be, better able to kind of look to those detachments if we want to run anything really specific like aspect warriors or ghost warriors, wraith units and jet bikes and stuff like that. We're going to get all that stuff in the codex. So anyway, all right, that's going to be it for the tabletop simulator examples. Let me know what you guys think about some of these little strategies and stuff like that and these little movement shenanigans and just kind of how to deploy the army and the kind of crazy movement you can get out of wave serpents and corsairs and falcons with swift deployment. I think that's honestly my favorite stratagem in the whole thing. I think if this stratagem didn't exist for this detachment, I would never play this detachment. But since it has that and it has some other stuff that kind of go along well with it, I'm like, all right, I'll give it some, give it some attention and try to play it a little bit, and see how it is. So yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments, and back to the video. Alright, so in conclusion, the Armored Warhost does have some interesting stratagems, but its best units are currently overcosted because of the power of Battle Host. In addition, the detachment just feels kind of bland without any reactive moves except outside of Rangers, and most of the stratagems you will find are completely unused in several matchups, and in most matchups only once per game, right? I mean, things like layered wards, things like anti-grav repulsion, they're not that good, right? They're not going to be used in most matchups. And again, even the fallback and shoot may only be used one time, right? You're not going to use it that much. So I personally don't think that this detachment has the strongest stratagems, and it's very front-loaded into being an Alpha Strike style list. The detachment does not have a flexible playstyle. You either have to fully build into it, or nothing at all, because it really is not going to benefit you to just build a balanced list with this type of detachment. It's very front loaded on vehicles. It's very spammy. You want multiple of the same unit, and that's just how it is, right? I think a lot more of its interesting play will be unlocked with the Codex when it gets new detachment rules and or battle focus, or datasheet rules, excuse me, and of course battle focus for the move shoot move. It'll be much more interesting. There'll be much more variety to this type of list once that's entered in, and I think it'll be much better. And truthfully speaking, I do think there's some interesting things you can do with this list, but I don't think they're as strong at all. They're just more of a fun thing to do, and they're not technically super powerful or OP. And I would say this though, if you find yourself playing casually against a group of friends and they hate playing your Eldar because they're just, you're a better player than everybody else in your gaming group, this detachment is a great way to handicap yourself a little bit. And I say that unironically. I really do. It's a way to handicap yourself a little bit in casual play, so that your friends, you're still playing a very tactical game with them because of what I, said earlier in the video with the, moving things to reserve and redeploying your guys and putting them back in transports. There's a lot of tricky little things you can do, but your opponent's not going to feel overwhelmed where, in battle host you can kind of do some of those same things with the trickiness, but you're also getting full rerolls, or no, not full rerolls, but a hit reroll and a wound reroll on everything, and you're getting a lot more power because you get more units to choose from that are good in that detachment. So, there is that. I think, and again, I say that unironically. I really do think that some players would benefit from having a crappier Eldar detachment that they can just kind of play casually and not be complained about. But of course, you know, uh, in 5th edition, I was running with a 4th edition codex, and people still found a way to complain against me in competitive RTTs and tournaments and stuff like that. When I was running my Mekdar, you wouldn't have believed the amount of people complaining. And, I even had Imperial Guard leaf blower lists complain about my army because at a certain point in 5th edition, we got the White Dwarf that gave us the Night Spinner back. We got Night Spinner rules, and Night Spinners were really good against vehicle parking lots, and I remember taking a couple of those, and it was literally the most, Eldar were not a competitive army at the time, but people just didn't know how to play against the Night Spinners, so they would park in their little vehicle parking lots, and when the Night Spinners started immobilizing and destroying tanks, the opponent would just rage and be like, "Oh, there's nothing to do." That's how the mentality of the game was back then. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I think this detachment is interesting in some ways, but of course, it's definitely not as good as Battle Host, and I think that needs to be kind of brutally just stated right off the bat. And it is one of the more underwhelming detachments of the entire Grotmas calendar because, so far, actually, I think believe it or not, I think there's one more that we just got, the Leagues of Votann, which is surprisingly almost on the same level, but not quite. I think the Leagues of Votann is a little bit ahead of this, but they're not happy either. It's like the elves aren't happy and the dwarves aren't happy, and the War of the Beard is, we're about to call a ceasefire and just shake hands right now and call a truce because we're both getting screwed up by the Imperium. The Empire of Man is taking over everything, and we're pissed. So now the dwarves and the elves are going to band together, and we're going to have a war against that. So anyway, I mean, really, I mean, the Imperium armies, I'm complaining a little bit here, but the Imperium armies are getting, banger after banger here. And a lot of the Xenos armies, aside from like a couple of them, are getting like lame detachments. I mean, I hate to say it, the Tyranid detachment, a lot of people are liking it. I think it sucks. I think it's one of the more mediocre ones. It happens to be good because it's super skewed into warriors. But then you have stuff like, Necrons, which is super good. And that's like it's almost like the only Xeno codex aside from Dark Eldar that got something really awesome and good. And yeah, anyway, maybe I'm just sitting here complaining for no reason. But that's what I got on this detachment. I think it can be interesting, but it's probably weaker overall than Battle Host until we get our codex. That's going to be it for today, guys. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much to all my patrons and supporters for supporting the channel over the last 2 years. Your help has really, improved the channel greatly. And if you do want to support the channel and join the Patreon, you will get full access to our community's Discord for free. So, you can always sign up for a Patreon free trial and then cancel it before you have to pay, and you get full access to our Discord, which is awesome. Please do that. Please, become a part of the community if you like the videos and you're an Aeldari fan. We have a lot of cool Eldar players in the Discord. And if you guys want to also grab some discounted Eldar minis on Amazon, I'll leave the, affiliate link in the description. That will help out the channel a little bit. If you choose to buy some discounted Eldar minis on Amazon, I do get a small, tiny percent kickback on that. And of course, if you do also want to buy some Eldar inspired apparel on the channel store page, I will leave that link in the description as well. And you can, pick up some Eldar inspired designs. For this new Warhost detachment, I have a couple of Fire Prism. I think I have the Fire Prism emblem and the Night Spinner emblem and stuff like that on there. So check that out if you want. Or you could just troll your friends and buy something like, Big Reaper Energy or Storm Guardian Life, or, buy a nice coffee mug for yourself with a Storm Guardian on it. Something like that, for your Eldar loving needs. And yeah, anyway, so that's going to be it for today's video. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.